Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Misty Highnote with TDI's Communications Office. Thanks for joining us today for our webinar about the TWIA Ombudsman and COAST program. We're going to start with a presentation about the claims process and policyholders' rights and responsibilities. After that, we'll take your questions during a live Q&A session. To get CE credit for today's session, be sure to stay online for the entire hour, including the Q&A at the end. You'll see a survey after we're done. Let us know what you think about the webinar. All right, let's start the presentation. We'll see you back here for the Q&A.
Hi, my name is Eric Casas. I'm the TWIA Ombudsman. Thank you very much for attending this InsuredEd. One thing that I would want to mention before I start is that I have a lot of information on some of these slides. So if you have any questions, we'll have a Q&A at the end, and you can ask us there. Or perhaps you would rather send us an email later or give us a call. That's perfectly fine as well. I'm more than happy to address that. This presentation will start with some basic information about the Texas Windstorm Insurance Association, which all of you are referring to as TWIA for simplicity's sake. The reason and time TWIA, the Windstorm Inspections Program, and the Ombudsman Program were created and the relationship with the policyholder. We will then discuss the claims process and other information. TWIA is not a state agency, and it is also not part of TDI. TWIA is a not-for-profit residual market insurance carrier, also known as an insurer of last resort. You will not see an ad on television, the radio, the internet, or in any other way since they cannot compete with the private insurance market. The only perils TWIA covers are wind and hail for residential and commercial properties located within the catastrophe area, which is designated by the Commissioner of Insurance. TWIA does not sell policies directly to consumers, so consumers must reach out to licensed insurance agents that are registered with TWIA to acquire a policy. I highly recommend always working with an agent, regardless of insurance carrier, but for this case, TWIA only receives applications from registered licensed agents. To be eligible for a TWIA policy, applicants and properties must meet certain criteria defined by the Texas legislature. Applicants must have been denied coverage by at least one insurer in the private market. Properties must be located in the designated catastrophe area. Properties must be certified as having been built to applicable building codes with limited exceptions. Properties located in specified flood zones, V-zones, that were constructed, altered, remodeled, or enlarged after September 1st, 2009, and that can obtain flood insurance through the National Flood Insurance Program must provide proof of flood insurance coverage. And properties must be in an insurable condition, and that is specified by TWIA in their plan of operations. This area, shown on screen, currently includes all 14 first-tier coastal counties and areas of Harris County located east of Highway 146. When the property is located inside the city limits and east of Highway 146, the following portions of Harris County are also included: LaPorte, Morgan's Point, Pasadena, Seabrook, and Shore Acres. All right, now let's talk about why TWIA, the Windstorm Inspections Office, and the Ombudsman Program were created. Insurance coverage has been an issue for coastal residents in Texas for a very long time. As a matter of fact, the Texas legislature was already working on a solution to this issue since the mid to early 60s by considering creating a residual market insurer. What really pushed the legislature to move forward with the creation of TWIA was Hurricane Celia in 1970, which cost around $434 million in damages. Most people affected by Hurricane Celia did not have coverage on their property, making the recovery process extremely long and difficult for many. The state of Texas does not have a statewide residential or building code adopted, so it is up to every city or county to adopt their own. With that in mind, the next event, Hurricane Alicia in 1983, not only brought more destruction to Galveston and Harris counties than anticipated, but it also uncovered another issue: the lack of residential and/or building codes applied to buildings, which worsened the effects of the event. The Texas legislature acted on these findings, and in 1988, the Windstorm Inspections Office started operating. The Windstorm Inspections Program can assist consumers before and during a repair or addition to ensure the builder meet certain code requirements so that the property owner can receive a certificate of compliance, also called a WPI-8. Hurricane Ike made landfall on September 8, 2008, causing over $43 billion in damages, according to the comptroller. A concern that was uncovered during this time was the difficulty TWIA policyholders faced while navigating the claims process, which led to a lot of claim-related problems. The Texas legislature identified the policyholders would benefit from an ombudsman program housed in TDI to help consumers know about the claims process while also informing them about their rights, their responsibilities, helping with complaints, etc. TDI created the COAST program to assist consumers navigate the claims process, and the COAST program is managed by the ombudsman. From an administrative standpoint, the ombudsman is housed within the Department of Insurance. The COAST program, which stands for Coastal Outreach and Assistance Services Team, ensures that policyholders have access to clear and helpful information about their claims process. This support is provided by a variety of channels, including informational materials like flyers, fact sheets, through consumer helplines, public meetings, outreach efforts, recovery efforts after a declared disaster, and through other online resources. One of the key functions of this program is public awareness. This program plays a crucial role in making the claims process more transparent and accessible. If guidance is ever needed, this resource is here to help. I would like to clarify that while the focus of this program is to assist consumers with their claims process, it is not a substitute for the policyholder's agents. I will also raise awareness of consumer rights, responsibilities, and essential information after a declared disaster by canvassing affected areas and speaking with policyholders at disaster recovery centers, also known as DRCs. The main takeaway here is that TWIA policyholders have a neutral resource they can access whenever they need. Here is a simple visual representation of the relationship between TWIA, Windstorm Inspections, and the Ombudsman program with the policyholder. TWIA provides coverage against the only two perils it covers: wind and hail. The Windstorm Inspections program certifies repairs and constructions with the WPI-8, and the Ombudsman program assists policyholders understand the claims process and help resolve issues they may face along the way, all working to help the policyholder in their own area. I'm going to briefly talk about the WPI-8. The WPI-8, which stands for Windstorm Program Inspection, may not apply to every repair, and because of that, would not require an inspection. It's a good idea that the interested party contact the local Windstorm Inspections office before they start any work. The property owner should ask if the project needs an inspection, and if the Windstorm Inspections office can perform it. If the project qualifies for an inspection by the Windstorm Inspections office, then they can send an inspector at no cost to the consumer. The property owner can also hire a Texas licensed professional engineer or an appointed qualified inspector, known as an AQI. But as a reminder, TDI does not regulate their inspection rates. I will briefly clarify some terms used to identify improvement stages that relate to the WPI-8. These two terms are new and ongoing improvements and completed improvements. New and ongoing improvements refers to any project that has not started or isn't finished. That could mean a brand new building or changes to an existing one. Changes done to an existing structure generally will be a remodel, expansion, over 100 square feet of repairs or replacement to the property's siding or roof individually, as in 100 for the siding and 100 for the roof, and additions to a building. All of those changes could qualify if they have not started or possibly if the project is in a very early stage. The second term, completed improvement, is considered when a building or structure is officially done or when it's mostly completed, even if a transfer of title is not processed. It will also be considered completed if the ownership has been transferred from the builder to the first owners. But for more specific information on this subject, please contact the local Windstorm Inspections Office. Coming back to the WPI-8 subject in general, to say that TWIA and other insurance companies can look up certificates to verify the property, repair, or addition is certified. Now, not everything needs to be certified, and some examples of that could be painting, carpeting, refinishing work, plumbing, electrical repairs, fence repairs, repair or replacement of gutters, temporary repairs after a storm, which I will talk about in a moment. TDI's website has a full list if some examples are needed. But then, what needs a certificate of compliance? Some common examples of improvements that need to be certified include new buildings, building additions or enlargements, windows, entry doors, garage doors and their frames, patio covers, decks, replacing a roof or repairing a significant portion of a roof, and significant portion means over 100 square feet. Residing a significant portion of an exterior wall, also over 100 square feet, would all require a WPI-8. So, in short, any modification that could affect the exterior components that separate the building's interior from exterior environments, also known as the building's envelope. And to really clarify the point, these exterior components are windows, doors, garages, etc. These are points of failure that can create an opening into the building, and that's why it's important to have them certified. There are two exceptions to the certificate of compliance requirements. The first exception is if the home was never certified and was built between 1988 and June 18, 2009. Then it might still qualify for coverage with an additional 15% surcharge on top of the policy premium. The other exception is if the policyholder had coverage with a private carrier that did not require a WPI-8 and the coverage was non-renewed or the carrier canceled the policy. A real example of this is if an insurance company that did not require the policyholder a WPI-8 for coverage goes out of business, forcing the carrier to cancel or non-renew policies by certain dates in the not-so-distant future, leaving the policyholder with little to no options. The next topic we have is the claims process and other factors that affect a claim like endorsements and even contractor scams. I will take this opportunity to share some helpful tips that will set up anyone for success when they submit a claim with TWIA. Policyholders should review their policy and endorsements before filing a claim. They should know what is and what is not covered. It is important to have a reasonable expectations that align with the policy contract. And as a reminder, the only perils TWIA covers is wind and hail damage. TWIA does not cover damage from storm surges or floods. Filing a claim is very simple. They just need to visit their claim center online or give TWIA a call. The policyholder can check the claim status by visiting the claim center as well. They can also contact their agent to submit a claim, but if their agent is local, they might not be able to start a claim process for the policyholder. So the policyholder must be prepared to have on hand the TWIA policy number, best contact information, and property damage details. A TWIA representative will call back to discuss the claim and next steps. If the loss is covered by the policy, reasonable costs for temporary repairs may be covered. And as I said, I will talk about temporary repairs in a moment. It is not advised to make permanent repairs until an assigned TWIA adjuster or representative has contacted the policyholder and provided approval. If an inspection is required, the adjuster needs to be able to see the interior and exterior damage in order to recommend an accurate claim resolution. The policyholder may also receive advance payments while the claim process is ongoing. The policyholder has a year to submit a claim against TWIA, but I always recommend they do it sooner rather than later for many reasons. One of those reasons being that the sooner they enter the claim, the sooner they get paid. But regardless, they do have 1 year from the date of loss to enter a claim. I also recommend they submit any supporting evidence for the claim. The better and clearer the documentation, the faster in general the process will be. But if something is missing that would prevent TWIA from proceeding with the claim, TWIA will contact the policyholder within 30 days for any of that missing information. And within 60 days from receiving all information, TWIA will then send a notice with their decision. TWIA must also let them know about supplemental payments if they have any additional repair costs from the covered portion of the claim. Temporary repairs include covering openings with a tarp or plastic to prevent additional water damage, removing trees which cause damage to a covered structure, boarding up broken windows and doors, drying out water damage and wet areas immediately with fans, interior water removal, removal of soiled carpet and sheetrock. It is very important that the policyholders save the receipts in a safe place to get reimbursed for those expenses. The property should be assessed and documented with pictures and videos. Nobody should put themselves in harm's way to obtain them. It's important to remember that a claim can be filed before assessing the property for damage. But what happens if TWIA partially or fully denies a claim? Well, TWIA is required to explain why the policyholder was denied, and the policyholder should also receive a detailed explanation outlining that decision. TWIA must inform the policyholder about the appraisal deadline and what they need if they intend to take legal action against TWIA. A form is included with the claims letter so that the policyholder can notify TWIA of their intent to take legal action if they believe it is necessary. It is important to remember that if a policyholder disagrees with the payout, they have the right to request an appraisal, which is the process where a third party helps resolve disputes over the claim amount. If TWIA accepts all or part of their claim, and the policy includes replacement cost coverage, the policyholder has the right to request a replacement cost payment. But there are some important steps and deadlines that they should follow. First, they need to submit documentation showing both the cost and completion of repairs within 545 days from the date they received TWIA's claim decision. Once TWIA receives their documents, they have 30 days to notify the policyholder of two things. 1, the amount they will pay, and 2, the deadline to request an appraisal if the policyholder disagrees with their payment decision. After they send this notice, TWIA is required to send payment within 10 days. The best way and the first step to resolve accepted coverage amount disputes is through active communication with all parties. The policyholder should gather detailed contractor estimates, any other estimates, and receipts for the cost to repair or replace the damaged property. When gathering contractor estimates and other estimates, line item estimates that break down to show labor and material costs rather than a single cost or a lump sum estimate, and repairs and replacements of a similar kind and quality as the original property should be requested. With a detailed estimate, TWIA can quickly compare the submitted estimate to their own and identify any differences. The policyholder is encouraged to share TWIA's estimate with their contractor or anyone else they are working with so they can also identify any discrepancies. TWIA will review the policyholder's estimates against their own and issue a supplemental payment if possible. And if the policyholder or contractor discover hidden or undiscovered damage related to the claim, notify TWIA to discuss any additional payment owed. The policyholder should submit their estimates and documentation of the damage to TWIA through their claim center or the policyholder portal. If they experience issues using the claim center or the policyholder portal, they can email documents to claims@twiya.org, and they must include the claim number in the subject line. Communicating by email may result in slower response times, and for the sake of security and efficiency, only policyholders, not their contractors, should email information and documents to TWIA. As mentioned earlier, if they're not satisfied with the payout, they can request a detailed breakdown of the calculated amount, and the policyholder can also request an appraisal to formally dispute it. They will have 60 days from receiving TWIA's notice to request an appraisal. But I recommend the policyholder do it as soon as possible to avoid any issues. They can request an extension if they make it within 15 days after the original deadline and show good cause. Communication is key here and beneficial to all parties. Here's a brief description on how the appraisal process works. The appraisal must follow TWIA's policy guidelines. Both the policyholder and TWIA will each hire an appraiser. They will split the costs evenly, including any umpire fees. If the appraisers can't agree on an umpire, the Commissioner of Insurance will select one from a roster of qualified umpires. Once the appraisal is completed, the decision is final and cannot be appealed. Unless there is fraud, corruption, or misconduct, then the policyholder would have 2 years to file a court case challenging that decision. But most importantly, if the policyholder does not request an appraisal within that given deadline, they lose their rights to dispute TWIA payouts. They can request an appraisal within 30 days of TWIA's notice that informed the policyholder of the replacement cost payment decision. Something very important to remember is that they do not need to have completed all repairs to start the appraisal process. This process itself follows the same rules as other claim disputes, with the exception that there are specific deadlines that apply to replacement cost disputes, which will be included in the notice letter. TWIA is required to include these deadlines when notifying the policyholder of their claims decision. That way, the policyholder knows exactly how much time they have to act. If the policyholder wants to challenge TWIA's denial in court, they must notify them of their intent before the deadline expires. Missing this deadline means losing their right to take legal action. The deadline is 2 years after receiving a claim decision to notify TWIA of a coverage dispute. If they miss this 2-year deadline, the policyholder waives the right to contest TWIA's denial of the claim. That essentially means that they can no longer bring a lawsuit concerning denial of coverage against TWIA. Before the policyholder files a lawsuit, TWIA may require them to submit the dispute to the Alternative Dispute Resolution Process, also known as ADR, to try to resolve the dispute. TWIA has 60 days from receiving the policyholder's notice to request this process. Once requested, mediation must be completed within another 60 days unless the claimant and TWIA agree to an extension or if one is granted by the commissioner. There might be the possibility that even with good faith efforts, the mediation does not resolve the issue. If that is the case, they can file a lawsuit in the county where the loss occurred. The case should be assigned to a judge from the impacted or nearby coastal county to ensure local oversight. A rule to remember is that if the policyholder files a lawsuit before completing the mediation, the court will pause the case until the process is completed and notice of intent to bring action has been provided. This slide is very self-explanatory. In a lawsuit against TWIA, it can only argue two things: whether TWIA's denial of coverage was justified and how much compensation the policyholder is entitled to under their policy. That means the court will not consider factors outside of these 2 points. Compensation is restricted to the covered loss under the policy minus any payment TWIA already made. Prejudgment interest, which starts from the deadline TWIA had to issue payment, court costs, and attorney fees. These next slides are going to be about some additional endorsements. I want to talk about these endorsements because these could be options the policyholder might not be aware of or think that they are already included. It serves as a good reminder to check what is covered under their policy. We're starting off with increased cost of construction, known by their endorsement forms as TWIA 431 and TWIA 432 for residential and commercial policies, respectively. When the policyholder is repairing their property, they might run into a situation where the local building codes have changed since their home or business was first built. That means they might have to upgrade certain materials or construction methods just to meet current regulations. This can be an unexpected cost, and that's the gap the increased cost of construction endorsement helps cover. It helps with the extra expense that is required to bring their repairs up to code. This endorsement allows the policyholder to select 10, 15, 20, or 25% of their coverage A amount, in addition to the limits, to be used to cover these additional costs. And to clarify, costs are on an incurred basis. So let's go through a quick example. What would you see if you select 10% and your coverage A is $200,000? You would see a total of $20,000 to be used for these additional costs. The most common structures that need to be upgraded are doors, windows, garage doors, siding, roofing, foundations, and even elevation requirements, like how high the foundation must be off the ground. The policyholder might have to do some research before they decide to talk to their agent about any potential changes to their policy. The policyholder could consult with some resources first for some guidance, like their contractor, the city building department, or the Windstorm Inspections Office. The contractor is a great start since they will know or have a pretty good idea about the property's construction and if it complies with applicable building codes. But I know that sometimes contractors go out of business, they move, or they are just simply unreachable for some reason or another. Well, if that's the case, the city's building permitting department might be of help, especially if the policyholder knows all the details on the property. Some city building codes send out a letter if the property has more than half of its value in damage, and it usually states that the repair or rebuild must comply with certain codes and regulations. Windstorm inspections may also be of help determining if the property meets the current building code for a WPI 8, but could also depend on the available information the policyholder might have. If they are not sure whether they have this coverage, they should check their policy packet. There should be a line item under Coverage A Property Description that lists increased cost of construction and the percentage covered. They can always contact their agent if the policyholder does not have that information on hand, and they would also be able to make any changes to their policy if they think they need it while they're on the subject. It will increase their premium since they're requesting additional coverage. Depending on their increased cost of construction coverage limits, TWIA might be able to help cover services provided by professionals such as engineers, architects, and flood elevation surveyors. There is a 2-year deadline from the date of loss to submit a claim for extra costs related to compliance. The policyholder will also need to submit some documentation to have TWIA proceed with the claim, such as photos of the structure before and after the upgrade, cost estimates and invoices for the work with line item description, the notice from their local jurisdiction explaining the required upgrades and or the specific building codes that apply to their repairs. Some things that the increased cost of construction endorsement will not cover is if the policyholder decides not to rebuild or if they decide to rebuild in a different way, making the structure not meet the same occupancy. It will not cover certain environmental cleanup costs, windstorm inspection fees, or any loss in the property's value due to the building code requirements. In some instances, the policyholder might have to find lodging due to a major storm causing damages to a large part of their roof or damage that made their kitchen inaccessible. Additional living expenses can help cover the extra costs of keeping their life as normal as possible while their homes are being rebuilt. This endorsement also needs to be added to their TWIA policy since it does not automatically come with it, and it will also increase their premium. They should check their policy's declaration page to verify if it's something their agent already added. The policyholder should let their agent know if changes to their policy will be needed and also verify any changes in premium. This coverage only applies to their primary resident and not vacation homes or rental properties. The coverage applies when their home is partially or completely uninhabitable due to a covered loss and not due to something like a flood or a fire. The policyholder must save the receipts if they have any extra living expenses. They must be able to prove what their regular expenses were before the storm as well. Additional living expenses can cover a temporary lodging like a hotel, an apartment, or a rental home. TWIA wants the policyholder to stay at a place like the home they live in. So if the policyholder has a 1,500 square foot 3-bedroom home, they will cover something similar. It can also help with higher utility bills if their temporary residence is more expensive to operate. Extra food costs if they're eating out more due to not having a kitchen. Expenses like fuel or tolls arising from living further and having a longer commute. And extra laundry costs if the policyholder must use a laundromat instead of their own washer and dryer. Additional living expenses will not cover spoiled foods. That's a separate type of coverage that we'll be talking about in a moment. It does not cover flood damage or loss of rental income. In other words, it will not help if the policyholder is not receiving income from a rental property. The process for additional living expenses is quite simple. The policyholder can simply call TWIA or talk to a claims examiner. They might be able to help the policyholder find lodging and will give them further instructions and information. As briefly mentioned, the policyholder should save all the receipts from the lodging, food, gas, etc. They only get reimbursed for submitted receipts, and they should gather any proof of their normal expenses like utility bills, food receipts, grocery receipts. The policyholder will be reimbursed later, but they will have to pay for those expenses up front. TWIA might be able to provide an advanced payment to help cover immediate costs, but it's something the policyholder must talk to them about. So, how are additional living expenses payments calculated? As a simple example, we'll say that a policyholder normally spends $1,000 a month on food, but after the storm, their kitchen is inaccessible. Their spending increases since the policyholder eats out more often and they're staying at a hotel without any appliances. Their spending sees an extra $500 a month on food because of that. TWIA would compare and subtract that from their normal expenses to then reimburse the policyholder $500 for those extra costs. The last two endorsements that we'll talk about are consequential loss and wind-driven rain. Okay, consequential loss. This extension of coverage applies to primary or secondary residences. Do you remember when I mentioned food spoilage being covered by another endorsement? Well, this is it. This coverage would apply if a wind or hail event caused damage to the policyholder's home, equipment inside it, or caused a utility failure like power, heating, or even cooling equipment, leading to temperature changes that ruin their belongings. This coverage is limited to $500, and this endorsement is also optional, so the policyholder should verify their policy or talk to their agent about any potential changes. Adding this endorsement can increase the policy premium. And lastly, wind-driven rain. This endorsement gives the policyholder additional coverage for damage caused by, wind-driven rain, whether or not the storm actually creates an opening in their home. A property that has not been properly maintained can be susceptible to interior water damage during a storm, since rain can be pushed through small openings created around seals and sidings, windows, roofs, flashings, etc. The property's envelope. Wind-driven rain can be traveling so fast in some cases that it can hit a building horizontally, even hitting the underside of roofs. Let's talk about contractor scams, an unfortunate reality during the recovery process after a declared disaster. Everybody wants their home to be repaired as quickly as possible after a storm, but rushing into a contract can be a bad idea. I'm going to highlight a couple of things to keep in mind while dealing with contractors after a declared disaster. The policyholder should be alert if a contractor asks them to sign something before they even disclose how much the repair will cost. Everything should be read carefully because they could end up signing a contract that could lock them into a bill they weren't expecting. On the other hand, contracts with blank spaces should not be signed. They could be filled in later with higher prices or work the policyholder never agreed to. A big red flag is if a contractor offers to waive the insurance deductible or work it into the bid. Not only it is illegal, but the insurance company might require proof that the policyholder paid the deductible before covering the claim. When a disaster is declared, it is illegal for an out-of-town contractor to take any money before doing any work. The policyholder should get written bids from multiple contractors, preferably local ones. The bid should include their business name, phone number, and address. Any references like local reviews, the Better Business Bureau, or any online footprint that give a clue about their behavior should be checked. And very importantly, cash should never be used. Any payments should be made using a traceable transaction. Okay, if you think all of this information was a lot, well, I have good news for you. It is recorded so you can access it whenever you need, and you can contact the ombudsman for further assistance, which happens to be me. Lastly, here's my contact information. Please feel free to reach out for any assistance or questions. Thank you.
All right, welcome back to the Q&A portion of our webinar. Panelists, please turn on your cameras and your microphones. All right, joining us to answer your questions is our presenter, Erica Sauce. We also have Eric Reddock. Eric is the manager of the Windstorm Inspection Program at TDI. And we have David Lawson. David is the business continuity manager at TWIA. TWIA is a separate entity and isn't a part of TDI. All right, just a couple ground rules before we get started. We're not going to answer any questions about a specific TWIA claim or situation you're having. You can email questions for TDI to coast@tdi.texas.gov and questions for TWIA to dlawson@twiA.org. We'll also put those email addresses in the chat, and I'll say them again before we leave. All right, first question. Can you make changes to a TWIA policy, like adding additional endorsements before hurricane season?
Yeah, so you are able to meet with your agent, and it's really advisable to do that maybe once a year before we get to June 1st. And as we get into June and July, these are sort of the early months of the season. And for Texas, August is really the time when those storms are expected the most. So really at any time until a storm enters the Gulf. We are able to change coverage. You can add coverages, you can add endorsements, or change your deductibles. The second that a named hurricane, and it's not a tropical storm, once a hurricane enters the Gulf, right at the coordinates of 80-20, so just south of Cuba, really, that is when we have to put up a policy moratorium, where basically we stop allowing the issuance of new policies or policy changes until the storm is no longer a threat to the coverage area. But until that time, you're able to work with your agent and really talk through the different possibilities that we have with the coverages.
Okay, great. The presentation mentioned adopting building codes for the WPIA. What does that mean?
The WPIA is evidence of certification by a certain code. The building codes that are important and have been adopted by the Texas Insurance Commissioner, currently the 2018 International Residential Code for houses and the International Building Code for commercial properties. Primarily, the important parts are the wind load issues on there. Different areas close to the coast have higher wind speeds expected during a storm, and those are built to a little bit higher standard.
All right. Does TWIA wind and hail coverage extend to my car?
It does not. Structures only, but David Lawson, please answer that one.
Yeah, no. So the coverage provided, your coverage A for the dwelling, it does extend to appurtenant structure. So let's say you have maybe a Mueller shed or your fence. So those sorts of things would be included as a 10% kind of allotment for those sorts of structures. But once you get into your car, your RV, your boat, that is not where our coverages would be able to provide anything for wind and hail. And so all that's going to have to go through on the auto side.
Okay. All right, Eric, when you were on the claim filing and processing slide, you mentioned a date from June 1988 to what was the other date?
Yes, it's 1988 and June 18, 2009 is one of the building years for the exception on the WPIA.
Okay.
I'll repeat it. It's 1988 and June 18, 2009.
Okay. And when you said if the consumer doesn't request an appraisal within the deadlines, they lose their right to dispute TWIA's payout decision. The question is, will they lose all their rights?
Just that to dispute that only. All the other rights, it does not affect that.
Okay. Okay. All right. Next question. Who actually makes the denial of a claim, TWIA or the agent providing the policy?
So the people involved in the TWIA claims process on our end are going to be your independent adjuster who's going to go out to the site and do the inspection, take photographs, and put together a bit of a narrative. And then that second person that's involved is the claim examiner. This is somebody who is a TWIA staff member and is going to review the adjuster's report. He's going to review the photos, the estimates, anything that's involved with that to take a look to understand how your unique policy is going to be lining up for the damages. And so all of those decisions are going to be made by a TWIA staff claim examiner. And likely before that even happens, we'll probably doing some additional investigations, possibly engaging some experts to determine that. But those claim decisions, the disposition of your claim is going to be decided and communicated to you by the TWIA claim examiner.
Okay, great. Next question. How do you get set up to be able to quote and sell a TWIA policy?
So any licensed agent in the state of Texas is eligible to write TWIA policies for us. And all you have to do is go to twia.org and go to the agent section and you can register there for that. And that includes captive and independent agents. So again, any licensed agent in the state of Texas, as long as you go through and register, you are able to place coverage through TWIA.
Okay, great. And do I have to use my primary homeowner's insurance carrier to procure TWIA, or can I shop carriers?
So from the agent's perspective, again, independents and captive agents are able to place that coverage. If you're looking at it from the policyholder side, the first thing in the initial eligibility requirement, in order for you to even send an application into us, is to be denied coverage by a private insurance provider that writes in the state of Texas. So you work with your insurance agent, and they're going to go out and look for coverages from all sorts of different private companies that could offer coverage, and many people do. We cover about 50%, maybe closer to 40% of the homes and businesses along the coast. So there are many private writers that are available for that. However, that initial declination of coverage is your first step towards eligibility for TWIA. So in order for you to even get to the point where we will be able to get you through and put an application in, you have to first receive that declination from a private carrier for the person's wind and hail.
And I would like to add to that as well. Just as a reminder, TWIA is an insurer of the last resort, so you do need to have that denial. And we always here at TDI recommend anybody visit helpinsure.com. That's helpinsure.com. And you basically put in very basic information. We're not going to share it because it's a TDI website. And it will populate in your area, in your zip code, all the carriers that sell policies. And it would include if they sell wind and hail insurance as part of their payrolls. So it's really important, or at least very advisable, to go check that out before you try to get in with TWIA, because they're usually more competitive than what is offered, because again, it's just TWIA is just an insurer of last resort.
Right. Okay. And do you know if other states offer a version of TWIA?
Some versions, yeah. I know that Florida has their own version of TWIA. Not exactly the same, right? But quite frankly, anybody near the coast has some sort of program like that. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's, the states really all throughout the Gulf of Mexico. When you look at Louisiana, Mississippi, even on the Atlantic side, North Carolina is another state. Any state that has this sort of risk or has unique risks, you'll likely find these risk pools where the coverages that would otherwise be denied by a private provider end up being able to be provided for by an entity like us. So we exist there, and then there's fair plans that exist, and that's a whole nother box of chocolates to open up. But for really the people who have the exposure to hurricane risk, this is where generally the private market is just not going to want to provide coverages for those coastal communities and the people with the largest threat there.
Right. Okay. The endorsements for consequential loss and wind-driven rain, are those separate endorsements?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry, you broke up a little.
Sorry. The endorsement for consequential loss and wind-driven rain, are those separate endorsements?
Yes, but David, if you want to add to that.
So, and again, when you go through this process with your agent, kind of going and picking and choosing and understanding how these different endorsements could impact the policy premium that you have and also the experience post-claim. So if you are working with your agent and you determine that the consequential loss piece, so let's say that we have a covered power outage, and we need to cover some food spoilage. That is definitely an endorsement and a kind of an allotment that can help you out up to about $500. The wind-driven rain side is going to really be impactful for many of our policyholders, because if you think about the characteristics of a storm, you're going to have those elevated wind speeds, and that's when those vents, those turtle vents on your roof, and even those windows could take that on. So a lot of people do have that endorsement. I don't have an exact percentage of how many of our policies carry that, but this really speaks to the importance of sitting down with your agent and talking through these scenarios to understand how these endorsements would impact the policy premium that you have to pay. So definitely probably the biggest thing that I'd point out is that when you go through that process, just determining what would be best for you in your situation is going to be the way to handle that.
All right, our next question. Why do inspectors need to have pictures of every slope and ridge?
Mr. Rupp?
So from the adjuster side, at least, when we go out to a property, one of the things that we really need to understand is the 360 view, the holistic view of the property itself. So even if we have a slope or a portion of the roof or a portion of the property that appears to have not been impacted by this, it's important for us to understand the full picture of damages and damages that could be there that are not claimed. There could be you might have some stuff under a soffit where that there's been maybe a leak there for a while, and that's just kind of accumulated over time, and that that's not a part of this. So we want to make sure that we fully document that property and understand what damages on the property could be applicable to our policies and then what are not. So from the adjuster side, it's important for us to get that 360 view and the full view of the property in order for us to understand how that storm and that date of loss impacted the property.
Okay, great. All right, our next question. What's the average percentage deductible for most TWIA policies?
I don't know the exact answer to that. I would love to get back with the person with the exact numbers that we have. But again, I think the biggest thing when it comes to deductibles and understanding that is how much that homeowner, that policyholder can afford and feels comfortable with, but also understanding how that deductible will impact coverage moving forward. If you go with a 3%, 4%, even a 5% deductible, when you look at how much it costs to replace a roof, if you have a large deductible, $8,000, $10,000, that's going to really impact how much payment you're going to be able to get above that deductible to cover those things. So, I would love to be able to get back with the actual average of those, but it just really speaks to the importance of understanding how that premium is impacted and how much of a tolerance the policyholder has for a higher deductible or a lower deductible.
All right, our next question. Is TWIA available statewide or only in coastal areas?
So Texas Windstorm is only available in the 14 coastal counties and then that little sliver of Harris County that's just east of 146 as you kind of go over there by LaPorte, just north of Clear Lake Shores. So the only people eligible for Texas Windstorm are those residing in those 14 coastal counties, along with the additional requirements that we have there. So anybody outside of that, if you live in Montgomery County, Fort Bend County, or B County, all of those are outside of that coverage area.
Okay. And a question similar to that. Do you know if there's any possible future extension of that coverage area, more north or west?
I'm not aware of anything. Obviously, the Texas legislature will be the ones to dictate that. But right now, the Chapter 2210 of the Texas Insurance Code and the laws and the kind of regulations that we have up in place are firmly for those 14 counties. And if you think about the exposure to hurricanes, that's not to say that flood, tornadoes, and thunderstorms are not going to impact those areas. But when you think about the exposure to the hurricane risk in particular, once you get into Conroe or Victoria or other parts just outside of that area, it becomes a lot less. So that is going to be again dictated by the Texas legislature. But currently, that's kind of what it's based around, is understanding what sort of impact we could have from that tropical threat.
Okay, great. For TWIA claims payments, are they subject to RCV or ACV guidelines, replacement cost or actual cash value?
So that's going to depend upon the endorsement and the policy that the policyholder has. If you have an ACV only policy, that's going to mean that depreciation is going to be withheld. But with the recoverable depreciation, try saying that 5 times fast, then you will be able to, within that 545-day time frame, once you have those repairs completed, then we would be able to release that depreciation.
Okay, we have time for maybe one more question. Can a city require a homeowner to get a WPI-8 to get a permit?
Yeah, I can take that one. Cities have their own ordinances and they can require different things. A lot of times they'll require WPI-1, which is just the application for certification. But in order for them to meet whatever their adopted code is for the city, then that's one way for them to meet that is to let an engineer or Texas Department of Insurance windstorm inspector do that inspection. So most cities that are in the windstorm area do not do windstorm inspections per se.
Okay, and one similar to that, can a city require a WPI-2 to close out a work permit?
Again, they can, if those are in their ordinance, then they certainly can.
Okay. All right, we're going to have to wrap it up here because we're out of time. If we didn't get to your question or you think of another one later, send questions for TDI to coast@tdi.texas.gov and questions for TWIA to dlawson@twi.org. All right, that's it for today. Thanks for joining us. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you at the next TDI InsureEd webinar.